Good morning, everybody, again. I feel like you've heard from me a lot today. Beep. Okay. So last week we talked specifically about the uniqueness of the person of Jesus. So being 100% God and being 100% man combined into one, and the others that would, have other, religions such as Mormonism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Taoism, how the prophets or teachers that founded them cannot come close to a comparison. Is Jacqueline all right? Okay. So it was so shocking that Jacqueline just had to react. So today, we're going to take that a step further, and instead of talking about the person of Jesus, we're going to talk about the uniqueness of the life of Jesus. Because just as in person, he is unique, being 100% man and 100% God, in his life is unique as well. No other person who has been born, that has died, has lived the life that Jesus had. He is unique in the way that he taught. He is unique in the way that he went about things in this world. He is unique, nay, even in his motivations for doing things. So we're going to take a look at some of those things. We're going to just take a look at his life. There are four full accounts of the life of Jesus found in the Bible. We call those what? Right. So if we want to take a good look at the life of Jesus, the unique life of Jesus, the best place to look is in those Gospels. So today we're just going to read starting in Mark 1:1 all the way through, and then we'll do Matthew and what? I mean, well, it makes sense, right? Okay. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make an assumption that at some point in time you have opened a Bible and you have read at least part of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. I'm not going to walk you through every single step, every single miracle, every single saying, every single interaction. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and if you have not read, shame. But please read more and see if this brief overview that I give makes sense, if it matches up to who Jesus is in life and his uniqueness. I'm also going to do a brief summary type of overview of Siddhartha Gautama, and that is he is basically the founder of Buddhism. So I'm going to give a brief overview of his life and basically to give you an opportunity to compare so that you have something to say, well, we've compared him here and we find, Jesus to be unique. Obviously, right out of the gate that I'm biased, but looking through this understanding of what the Bible says, the understanding for the most part what Buddhism itself teaches, we'll have an idea of the personhood of Jesus and the personhood of Siddhartha, and it'll give us an understanding. There are many other people that Jesus has been compared to. Jesus has been compared to Muhammad. Believe it or not, he's also been compared to people like Joseph Smith. We touched on those things last week. Jesus has been compared to Mithras and the sun god Ra, and all sorts of different people throughout history and mythology. There was a resurgence after World War II. Up until that, basically around World War II, there was just an understanding that those myths did not compare to the person of Jesus. Academically speaking, those were discounted 100%. But after World War II, you have just this great technological race that brings us to where we are today with the information being so readily available, with people being able to Google anything and say anything on the internet, it has brought these arguments back into the forefront, even though they were completely dismissed more than half a century ago as being, things that just didn't hold water. So now we deal with it because it has made its resurgence. But just so you know that this argument that Jesus was not a unique individual, that he is just another in a long line of teachers, or he is a copy, an amalgam of other myths that have come before him and after him, it doesn't hold water. And that's not just me speaking. I'm not doing that thing where I said, where I'm going to stand before you and tell you, well, this Bible has been looked over by scholars, it has been debated by great theologians, it has been translated many times, and everything they've told you is wrong. I'm going to tell you what it really says today. I'm not going to insult your intelligence that way. I am going to present some facts for you to weigh for yourself, and then I will pray and urge you to do this research as well so that you can come to conclusions as well. And we'll also challenge you with some things at the end here. So let's talk a little bit about Jesus. I'm assuming that you've heard of him. Everybody heard of Jesus? Right. Was his last name Christ? No. Okay, good. All right. So we've been listening this year. That's great. All right. There are certain claims that were made about Jesus that, have been compared to claims that have been made about other people. But when we look specifically at the Gospels and even the writings of the Apostle Paul, we see that there are certain attributes that are claimed that are specific only to Jesus. Remember that when the Gospels were written, they were written specifically to Jewish believers, right? The Jewish society itself is not a society like the, pagans around them that took a little bit of this God, took a little bit of this God, trying to, come to peace with other people or anything like that. The Jewish tradition was that there was only one God. They were unique amongst their neighbors, and they specifically set themselves apart because they were the chosen people of God. Any attempt to glam on from anything from their neighbors religious-wise was not commonplace at all. In fact, it was not done. You can see that in the, if you don't take the Bible, if you just take the Talmud, if you take the Jewish Old Testament as it were, if you take those writings and look at it, you'll definitely see that there's not this understanding that, if we take a little bit from here and here and here, that we'll get something that kind of works for everybody. That is not the type of people that is being written to in the Gospels. These are people that would outright reject any attempt to meld other religions into their understanding of who God is and the way that he acts. So with that understanding, let's just take a few looks at how Jesus is described. In John chapter 6 to be specific. So in John chapter 6, we're going to look at verses 67 through 69. All right. Then Jesus turned to the 12 and asked, "Are you also going to leave?" Simon Peter replied, "Lord, to whom should we go? You have the words that give eternal life. We believe and we know that you are the Holy One of God." So the understanding of the disciples, Simon Peter says, is that you are the Holy One of God. Then we look at John chapter 7, verse 15. Jesus is teaching openly at the temple. Chapter 7, verse 15, the people were surprised when they heard him. How does he know so much when he hasn't been trained, they asked. Or how did this man learn so much without having studied? John 7, verse 46, we have never heard anyone speak like this, the guards responded. So we have three instances of Jesus being identified as the Holy One of God, him speaking in such a way that people can't believe, they are amazed at what he's saying in the temple, and even the guards saying, we have never heard anybody talk in this way. So the very way that he taught was different than what they had heard before. Especially when it comes to his teaching in the temple, the Jews being amazed at how much he understood and the way that he taught is pretty interesting when you think about it. They're used to traveling rabbis coming through the temples at various times and doing readings of the scriptures and giving insights and teachings to this. And when Jesus comes through and teaches openly in the temple, they are amazed to hear how he talks, amazed to hear what he has to say. And they're also amazed because they know where he comes from. He is a Nazarene. He is a common man. He wasn't born to wealthy parents. He was born to Mary as the Son of God, and his father Joseph, and he was a carpenter, a man that worked with his hands. So he wasn't expected to have the ability to be as learned and as well thought out in his presentation as what he was teaching. And he also did so in a way that they weren't used to hearing at all. The Bible also tells us, in probably a verse, at least a verse that you all know, and then continuing on, John 3:16. John 3:16 through 18. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. There is no judgment against anyone who believes in him, but anyone who does not believe in him has already been judged for not believing in God's one and only Son. The words that are used for one and only are translated from the Greek monogenes, which literally means one of a kind. This word emphasizes the unique nature of Jesus. In all of human history, there was no one like Jesus because only Jesus was the literal Son of God. We also see in John 5:18, Monogenes. I like even listen to pronunciations and everything this time. I'll mess up still, but I tried. So, John 5, verse 18. We see that the Jewish leaders tried all the harder to find ways to kill him, for he not only broke the Sabbath, he called God his Father, thereby making himself equal to God. So the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, even understand that he was calling God his very own Father. The Greek term for God the Father exists in basically there's a special relationship that Jesus is claiming between him and the Father that no one else claims. It excludes all other relationships. So because Jesus Christ is God's only Son, the Apostle Paul discusses his supremacy and preeminence over all creations in Colossians. Colossians 1, verses 15 through 18. Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created, supreme over all creation. Through him, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things that we can see and the things that we cannot see, such as thrones, kingdoms, rulers, and authority in the unseen world. Everything was created through him and for him. He existed before anything else, and he holds all creation together. The Greek word translated as image is icon. That's E-I-K-O-N. So it's like the word character that's used actually in Hebrews 1:3, and it means Jesus is the express image or in the identical nature of God. So he's described as the firstborn of all creation, that he is before everything that was created. And the word used to describe him is prototokos. Prototokos. Nailed it. Which is different from the word zio. Tizo. Man, I worked so hard on pronunciation this time. Tizo, which means created. So the Apostle Paul is specifically emphasizing Christ's preeminence, priority, and sovereignty over all creation. Through him, all things were created, and for him, all things were created. So Paul is saying specifically that without Jesus, there would be nothing that was created, since God created all things through him and for him, which rises him above all of creation as a unique individual. The author Philip Brooks, who is the author of O Little Town of Bethlehem, had this to say. He was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman. He grew up in another village where he worked in a carpenter shop until he was 30. Then for 3 years, he was an itinerant preacher. He never wrote a book. He never held an office, never had a family or owned a home. He didn't go to college. He never traveled more than 200 miles from the place that he was born. He had no credentials but himself. He was only 33 when the tide of public opinion turned against him. His friends ran away. One of them even denied him. He was turned over to his enemies, went through the mockery of a trial, was nailed to the cross between two thieves, and while he was dying, his executioners gambled for his garments, the only property that he had on this earth. When he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. 19 centuries have come and gone, and today he is the central figure of the human race. Again, that was Philip Brooks, who wrote O Little Town of Bethlehem. In addition to the understanding of the apostles that we get through the Gospels of the claims that Jesus made to be the unique Son of God, the only Son of God, to him being supreme over all creation because all things were created through him and for him, Jesus backed that up with his own credentials. His own credentials being the miracles that he performed. So let's just take a look at some of the different miracles. Now, he is, by all means, not necessarily the only person that has ever performed any miracles, right? There are magicians. I wanted to say mysticians, which is wrong. So there's mystics, there's magicians, there's advisors that work on royal court. That we even read of Moses and Aaron being able to turn their staffs into serpents to match the magicians in Pharaoh's court, that type of thing. So how does Jesus differ from these magicians, these mystics that would perform different rituals and healing? Jesus of the gospel never bases any of his healings or exorcisms on magic. All of his miracles were based on two things: God's concern for the individual and the individual's faith. We can see that in various places. In Matthew chapter 9, verse 2, page stuck together. There we go. Some people brought him a paralyzed man on a mat, and seeing their faith, Jesus said to the paralyzed man, "Be encouraged, my child, your sins are forgiven." Also again in verse 22. So verse 20 through 22. Just then a woman who had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding came up behind him and touched the fringe of his robe, for she thought, "If I can touch him, just touch his robe, I will be healed." Jesus turned around and when he saw her said, "Daughter, be encouraged. Your faith has made you well." Also again in verse 9 of chapter 9. Then he touched their eyes and said, "Because of your faith, it will happen." Then their eyes were opened and they could see. Jesus sternly warned them, "Don't tell anyone about this." So this approach, basing it on the individual's faith, is not common with any of the magical practices of his day. Not only that, but did you hear that last one? Don't tell anyone about this. See, Jesus' miracles were not an effort to uplift himself or his magical abilities. He did not heal people in order to lift up his own street cred, as would be the local practices of the day. He also did not invest in any formulas or rituals of power. There were no invested objects. There was nothing that he used as a talisman or even a staff. The only thing that we see he used other than his laying of hands or even just being touched, as in the case of the woman that was bleeding, was his own spit, which he spit into the mud and spread on the eyes of the blind man and also on the tongue of the mute. Again, those things were done, though, in the presence of the teachers of law specifically for their benefit, as they themselves had nothing to do with the actual healing that took place. We also have a wealth of literature that shows us the actual things that Jesus did. There are many tomes and books that claim to have spells and healing properties, and we have basically just taken that information from various scant places. So there's not like great tomes written on each magician, street magician, each mystic, and all of the works that they have done. But we have 4 books that are written specifically as gospels to the actions that Jesus took that speak to actual eyewitness accounts of these things that took place. There is no other person who has performed these types of miracles, that has done any type of magic, that is documented as well as Jesus. Also, there is a great deal of the same literature that talks about mystics of the ancient world that show that the practitioners were actually successful in part by claiming that these things work, such as incantations, pyramids, crystals. You see some of those references resurface today. And the overall, well, let's just say, I feel like I'm more protected. I feel better. It is that wonder tonic. I was talking yesterday with Josh. Julia and I attempted to make a root beer kombucha. I say attempted because we were not successful. You can drink it, but there's a certain taste. So Josh and I were talking about the possibility of marketing that as the doctor's mind, health tonic, to wipe away all ills. and the tingling on the tongue shows that it's working. That is the same type of thing that you get from mystics and magicians. Little type of thing. There's been a resurgence lately of this one. There was also a movie made about, and a kid tried this out. So, well, anyways, I'm getting off track here. But if you ever take a gum wrapper, the foil gum wrapper, and you bite it on your teeth, and it right? Not everybody, but it makes a connection on your feeling. Did you know that if you do that, you know that you've actually been activated as a secret CIA operative? Right? Great. Right. So there are many things that are used as tricks, as snake oil is the term that we use to describe all these different things, these potions and what have you, that are supposed to heal you from all of your ills, that are supposed to make you feel a specific way, that activate those things. And those have been shown to be nothing. When you research them scientifically, you can find nothing that actually shows any reproducible results from those crystals, pyramids, tonics, incantations, anything. But you can feel luckier and healthier and more protected and so on. But there is no way that you can draw a parallel to the kind of miracles that Jesus performed, as we have written down for us in the Gospels. The people that walked away or saw for the first time or talked for the first time did not simply feel like they could see suddenly, feel like they could walk suddenly, feel like they could talk. Any attempt to argue that the historical Jesus was just another magician must be judged as misguided. Jesus healed and he cast out demons in a unique way, and why he healed and cast out demons was unique as well. And most certainly it had nothing to do with magic. Now, in contrast with Jesus, let's take a look at Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha. Now, he was born in around the 6th century BC in what is now known as Nepal. His father, Suddhodana, was the ruler of the Sakya people. It was a warrior-like tribe. And his mother was, of course, the queen. So Siddhartha grew up a prince. And he lived most of his young adult life as a prince until about the age of 29. He'd even married. His wife's name is Yasodhara, and it was his cousin's child, his cousin's daughter. He did have a son at the age of 29 during a personal crisis. He saw all sorts of different forms of human suffering that he had been removed from as a prince. He had been removed from those things, and when he saw them, and he saw that he himself would be subject to that human suffering, disease, old age, death, it drove him into a personal crisis. And he left his family, his wife and child, in order to seek out a way that he might stall off any type of suffering for himself. In doing so, he traveled further east, studied deeply under many yogis, as it were. Let's see, for 6 years he submitted himself to ascetic practices, studying and following different methods of meditation, many different teachers. He was never fully satisfied with anything that they taught or that he learned. But one day, after striking out on his own away from these teachers, he was offered a bowl of rice from a young girl, and he accepted it. And in that moment, he realized that the way to achieve what he was searching for was to follow a path of balance rather than extremism. He called this path the middle way. He explained that the middle way is in between asceticism and a life of luxury. And there are four noble truths: suffering, its origin, how to end it, and the eightfold path that leads to the extinction of it. You with me so far? All right. He believed in the impersonality of all beings. He believed that there was no God, that in reality there is nothing that exists. How does this compare so far to Jesus? He taught that you can become enlightened like him, that you could achieve what he called nirvana, which is the understanding that you yourself do not even exist. He was once asked, how do I achieve happiness? And he said, if you remove I, which shows personal want, and you remove achieve, which shows jealousy and greed, you are left with happiness. Well, it's true. You get rid of the I and achieve, and then you just got happiness left, right? So, how does that compare to Jesus? We even talked last week about Buddha and how during his lifetime he refuted all attempts to raise him to the level of God. Yet, several centuries after his death, his followers called him a god, which is the opposite of what he wanted, because he did not want there to be anything. He did not want to be special, right? Because that's at the extreme. He wants to be in the middle. So he did not preach that you could be saved, that you could come to salvation through relationship with God, because he did not believe that God existed, and he believed that the only way to save yourself was to save yourself and realize that you are nothing and nothing exists. And that if you don't get it right this lifetime, just keep going. You'll have another one, you'll be reincarnated, and you can try again and get further along. So that's a brief comparison between Jesus and Judah. There's a lot more evidence of the life of Jesus. There are accounts that were written within 60 years of his death. We have more information available to the actual life of Jesus that we can double check to see that has not been adulterated, that has not been changed. For Siddhartha, we can see original text that he wrote, and then you can see the revisions that his followers have self-inserted into it to raise him up above the level that he himself wished to attain. Now, besides those many differences that are apparent, there is one that I asked you to think about, and that was motivations. I want you to think about this theme. You may have heard it before. A young man from a small town feels trapped and wants to get out. He wants to go out into the world, to the big city, and he wants to make something of himself. He wants to make his mark on the world. I want to be somebody, or I want to make a difference come into play. Does that sound familiar? You could almost insert just about any movie title into that. That is what our entertainment shows that we need to be thinking about, right? We need to do everything we can to make sure that our name carries on. Do any of you know who Robert Ankeny is? Ankeny. No? He's even got a street name for him in downtown Portland. He is one of the pioneers that led to firefighting and its common practices in the Portland area. Right, Robert Ankeny. He's got a street named after him. He made his mark on the world. He has achieved what we're told that we should achieve. Great. Nobody knows who he is. Think about this theme. A young woman rebels against the role society has put her in. She seeks to hold out strong and not be broken, to conform to these new societal norms. She has satisfied herself with having relations with a man that she knows could turn her in and end her life. She knows that she could get caught and she would be hung as an example. But she is satisfied because at least someone would remember who she is. Handmaid's Tale. It's a new Hulu original. That's a basic synopsis of the path that is taken. The whole idea of, I just want to be remembered. That's what we're taught our motivation should be, right? That in order to achieve greatness, we must work hard to make sure that our name lives on, that our legacy lives on. I would like you to contrast what the world tells us that we should be doing now with the motivations of Jesus, even the motivation of Siddhartha. Siddhartha's motivation was to end the suffering that he saw by saving himself from having to deal with it. The middle way is a life path designed to work with all people and not arouse any hostilities towards you or anyone else. To desire nothing as nothing is the only real thing. To self-attain a state of nothingness. Oneness with everything, which is nothing. Jesus lives a life dedicated to following the will of his Father God. Everything that he teaches seeks to end the suffering of man by returning him to a correct relationship with God. Even though he knows that he himself must be sacrificed. We even see in the garden how he approaches with this great pain and suffering he's about to endure as he prays, "Take this cup from me, but not my will, but yours be done." Jesus is unique in his life by the way that he lived it, by the way that he taught, for the reasons that he taught. He is unique for his motivations in life. He is unique as a person. So I have just two questions for you. I would like you to contemplate them and think about it. Would like you to think about what your motivations in life are. What is it you're seeking to achieve in life? And then compare that to the example that we're given in Jesus. And as a follow-up to that, what are you teaching by how you live and what you say? Do you even think in those terms? So that's what I would like you to discuss. Please separate into cell groups and let's have some good discussion.